Let's now consider late adulthood. What ages are associated with it? Take a moment and consider that question. There's Bailey, the rescue dog. Hopefully you said ages 60 to 65 until death. In the US, a typical adult will live nearly 2 healthy decades in their post-retirement years. Now, having 2 decades of life post-retirement means these decades have to be funded. And remember, Social Security alone is not sufficient to meet basic expenses and certainly not to give a quality of life that the person enjoyed while they were working. I remember the 3 legs of the retirement stool, pensions being one, but personal savings is a major leg of that stool. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of long-term care insurance. The earlier you buy it, the cheaper it is. It's not a cheap insurance, but it would provide services to keep you in your home. So whether some people would be sent off to nursing facilities, this would provide for people to come into your home so you could stay in your home. If you do go to a nursing facility, it would get you higher quality and also preserve your finances much, much, much longer so that your children or whoever you want to receive it will actually receive it instead of the government taking it to pay for your costs. So I did purchase one, and it's a very good idea. Let's consider 2 important themes of entire life, but particularly of late adulthood. First one, use it or lose it. That applies to the brain, that applies to the body. Another theme, losses can be reversed. Pictured from your text is 82-year-old Emmestine Shepherd, who, as you might want to correctly guess, has won many bodybuilding contests for individuals her age. Very impressive, I think. Let's break down the late adulthood into the 3 recognized groups of ages. Young old, which is 65 to 74. Old, 75 to 84. And oldest old, 85 and up. Now of those, or for that matter any age group in the US, what is the fastest growing? Well, it would be the oldest old, the 85 and older. These require the most assistance from family and society. Now focusing on the oldest old, the 85 plusers, how common is Alzheimer's? Approximately half of them have Alzheimer's. I should add on about Eileen Noble. She didn't begin running until age 50. And as the time I made the slide, she had participated in 19 marathons. So it's basically never too late to begin. Since we are considering functional age in terms of the running of the London Marathon, let's consider Vayoja Singh. He gave up running the marathon at age 100. And by the way, this marathon is not a 5-mile, or it would be probably K over there. It is 26 miles. I thought it might be interesting for you to compare some of the longest lived animals. So take a look at the list here and rank them from oldest living to youngest living. Your choices are the Greenland shark, pictured there with a person swimming next to it, the bowhead whale, which is the longest lived of the whales, humans, the clam known as the quahog, if I'm saying it right, clam, and we can't forget the tortoise. You can see a picture of Jonathan the tortoise there as a youngster, and when this picture was taken in 2016. So go ahead and rank them and see where people compare on the list and how everything else compares to everything else. So the oldest known living animal is a particular quahog clam that's 507 years old, and you're wondering, how can we possibly tell? Well, they have rings like trees, so they counted the rings. Now, could there be other clams that have never been counted by people that are older? Certainly, yes. The oldest vertebrate animal would be the Greenland shark. The Greenland shark can live to be, at least the oldest one we've encountered, is almost 400 years old, 8 years shy of being 400. The oldest mammal would be the bowhead whale, shown in one of the pictures on the slide. The bowhead that we where that's lived the longest is a little over 200 years old, by 11 years if you care, but a little over 200. Now if you look at the tortoise there, that's Jonathan. Jonathan is at this point 191 years, and I did check, that's a 2024 number, so Jonathan is still going strong. Humans, well, depending on who you want to believe, either 119 or 122. I would push you in the 119 direction for belief in terms of the oldest living human. So hopefully you found that interesting. Your text indicates that Jean Clement, at 122 years old, is probably the oldest living person, and that is often not considered to be the case. It appears that her daughter, after she died, posed as her to get the record. The woman pictured is most likely the daughter, not the mother, which makes her much, much younger than 122. To see the true world records holder, please go to the next slide. So let's not view Jean Calment as being the oldest living person, but rather let's give that honor to Sarah Naus, born in 1880, died in 1999, and she is recognized by the Guinness World Book as the longest person. Amazingly, in her family, including her, there were 6 generations alive at the same time. Utterly amazing. For this slide, I'd like you to take a look at the average life expectancy for OECD countries, and I also have to stop and think about that acronym myself, and you're probably not familiar with it, but it stands for the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development. It's a big deal. Please note the data point for the average country in that organization. Then find the U.S. Are we above or below that average red figure there? And then, if you will, please look at the countries around us. And the countries that are around us in this figure, are they considered to be our peer nations or not? So compare the nations that surround us to the nations on the other side of that red line. And I think it's kind of interesting. So let's continue our discussion from the previous slide. So you'll note when you find that red bar and you find the US, we are below that red bar quite clearly. So we are faring lower than the average OECD country. But let's look at the countries that surround us. Many of them would be referred to in the past as third world. Now, more respectfully, I hope we think of them as developing nations or developing countries. The ones that on the other side that do better than the average are peer nations such as much of Europe, Canada. We do significantly less well than. So consider that and consider possible explanations. And then you can proceed to the next slide. If you're wondering why I include that particular picture, I just thought it was a nice picture of people in late adulthood. They're having fun, and that's the only reason. Make sure you spend a moment learning that acronym OECD. It's for the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development. If you put cooperative, which I do sometimes accidentally, that's okay too. But anyway, Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development. So let's start with diet. in some of the highest ranked countries, diets are very high in, not in animal-based proteins, but very high in plant-based calories. We are the reversed. Countries that live a long number of years, such as South Korea and Japan, eat far fewer processed foods. You also see a much higher rate of obesity and related health conditions in the US. What would be some of these related health conditions? Take a moment and see how many we can think of. So you might have said diabetes, very good answer. Heart disease. Heart attacks not only kill, they incapacitate and debilitate. Strokes, again, strokes don't always necessarily kill. They can also incapacitate. Cancer as well. Cancer is much more prevalent in individuals and cultures that have very poor diets, high fat, low plant. Drug use is also a significant factor. Lack of universal health care. We spend the most, but we have far from all people covered. Untreated mental health issues. Poverty-related issues. Right now we're seeing a spreading of the economic well-being of the 1% versus the average person. So poverty and this gap is now widening terrifically. And discrimination-related issues. Some of the many reasons. So quite obviously, there's a difference in the number of years that one would expect for a healthy life expectancy in rich industrial nations versus the poor nations. What are some of the factors that influence the healthy life expectancy? Poverty is a factor, but malnutrition can be a prominent factor. Preventable disease, this picture makes you definitely consider the effect of contaminated water, amongst other issues. Pregnancy and birth-related issues. Again, in these countries, women often die earlier than men related to lethality in pregnancy and childbirth itself. Dangerous jobs. Clearly, no OSHA would be protecting the workers of this particular area. And even armed conflict. So let's look at some of the many factors that can be associated with longevity. They are both biological, psychological, and social. They all combine and interact. Start with genetics. Some people have longevity genes. In no small part, this is related to how long the end caps stay on the chromosomes. Can you remember the term for those end caps? Hopefully you said telomere. And better immune systems, so people don't die of regular flu or COVID. Or cancer. A good immune system destroys cancer cells before they destroy you. Health would include low substance use, high exercise, and the good diet. The personality trait of optimism. Optimism has a profound impact. People with cancer that are optimistic have a much higher rate of survival than people that are pessimistic. It also influences how well you do at school, how well you do at work, and general life. As much as you can, try to be optimistic. Activities, such as stimulating work, and also community involvement. Social, does that person have a social network of friends and family? All these factors are associated with longevity. Next, let's consider two important terms related to quality of life, ADLs and IADLs. ADLs, activity of daily living. The basic ability to take care of oneself, whether it's getting out of bed, getting dressed, moving around your apartment, eating, bathing, and so on. The IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living. This is beyond simple living. These require much greater cognitive ability. Basically, it's to navigate the environment of one's life. Shopping, paying bills, making appointments with doctors, and so on. The next slide will consider the leading causes of death in late adulthood. Before you go to it, could you take a moment and see if you can predict as many as possible of these 5 leading causes? Take a moment and actually please do it. So as you look at the slide and the 5 top reasons why we die in this country, were you surprised or were you pretty much aware of them? Heart disease, probably not a big shocker. One of the major causes of heart disease is obesity. That also impacts cancer, and that also impacts stroke. In terms of chronic respiratory diseases, this will often involve tobacco use, either firsthand or secondhand exposure, but that also plays, again, another role in heart disease and cancer and stroke. So in terms of this slide, definitely know the top 3 causes, but also know the 2 underlying causes we considered: obesity and use of smoked tobacco products. So as you look at the slide and the 5 top reasons why we die in this country, were you surprised or were you pretty much aware of them? Heart disease, probably not a big shocker. One of the major causes of heart disease is obesity. That also impacts cancer, and that also impacts stroke. In terms of chronic respiratory diseases, this will often involve tobacco use, either firsthand or secondhand exposure, but that also plays, again, another role in heart disease and cancer and stroke. So in terms of this slide, definitely know the top 3 causes, but also know the 2 underlying causes we considered: obesity and use of smoked tobacco products. We should take a moment to consider 2 underlying factors that affect most of these, some very significantly. For heart disease and cancer and stroke, and possibly a much lower extent the other 2, would be obesity. Obesity puts us at risk for heart disease. Many cancers are much higher prevalence in obese people. Strokes related to high blood pressure and poor circulation. Also, the use of smoked tobacco products. I say smoked tobacco because if you're on the patch, you're not increasing your risk. But nicotine and its affiliated chemicals in tobacco are obviously a major cause of chronic respiratory disease, but also cancer, not limited to lung cancer, but also heart disease and stroke. So again, let's consider these 2 underlying factors as we consider these top leading causes of death, at least in the US. Let's consider aging of the senses, starting with hearing. Most people have a gradual, unnoticeable hearing loss, pronounced presbycusis. I certainly have a certain degree of it. But how common is hearing loss well beyond this presbycusis? How common is severe loss? Well, 60-75, about 25% of people, so 1 in 4, so not uncommon. Severe loss at 75 and older is at least half of the people. This would be levels that would interrupt their daily and functioning and overall quality of life. Well, of the people that actually could benefit from hearing aids, what percent actually use hearing aids? Apparently only 1/3. Take a moment and consider why they aren't using hearing aids. Since I made this original narration, over-the-counter hearing aids are now available as little as $100, though I might suspect to get one that has features you like and is also the help and service that you need might be considerably more, but many of them do have money-back guarantees, so that certainly opens up a new world of hearing for older people. And I will say that inability to hear is associated with an Alzheimer's risk. People that can't hear don't socialize, don't engage, and that's a major risk factor for Alzheimer's. Let's consider vision issues in late adulthood, both normal and pathological. Common issues would include issues with glare, dark adaptation, distinguishing colors, and the irritating feeling of dry eyes. Now let's consider some of our conditions and their associated terms. Starting with presbyopia, That starts around 40, which would be in early adulthood. The lens of the eye starts to become rigid. As it stiffens, it is no longer able to focus the image correctly on the retina. This results in objects not being able to be seen distinctly, especially objects that are close up. So you often will see a person reading with perhaps the newspaper or the menu held at arm's length. Clearly this person has presbyopia. Their lens is not focusing the image properly, so now they're compensating, perhaps with extending their arms. Other conditions include cataracts. The eye is mostly composed of water and protein, and in cataracts, the proteins of the lens are starting to congeal. Visually, the person would have a hazy, bluish-gray color inside the eye. You can do things to increase or decrease your risk. Smoking obviously increases risk. You probably can't do much about your genetics or diabetes. They are both risk factors too. Though you can try to protect your eyes with UV eye protection. How common is it? Fairly common. Consider 75 and older. Conveniently for students trying to learn the number, 75% of 75 and older people have cataracts. In a country such as ours, not a significant problem. Simple eye surgery done not even under local, just with an injection to the eye. The person walks out in a few hours with funky eyeglasses, good to go. But cataracts in many countries that are poor are not operated on, and they're a major cause of blindness. And cataracts do actually appear in people of all ages, including children, adolescents, and young adults. So worldwide, cataracts are a major cause of blindness and a fixable cause. Let's consider next macular degeneration. It's degeneration of the macula. I know that was very helpful. The macula is the fovea, if you learn that term in intro psych. I don't teach it. The macula or the fovea is the most sensitive, accurate part of the retina. When you look, you always try to get the image focused on that particular part of the eye. And in macular degeneration, that macula, basically the best part of your retina, is starting to deteriorate. In part, it's due to a fatty protein buildup, and in part, it's due to thinning. Risk factors, smoking, of course, and maybe you've got bad genetics. Let's consider glaucoma. Which one is glaucoma? Too much fluid inside the fluid chambers of the eye, called the humors. It's not a painful condition at all, but as the pressure increases, it starts to damage the retina. And when this happens, slowly the person loses peripheral vision. What test at the eye doctor is for this? If you're thinking that puff of air, yes, that puff of air is one of the tests used to detect glaucoma. Next, I think you'll enjoy looking at the next slide. In the upper left, there's a picture showing normal vision, and the three other pictures try to identify. One is of macular degeneration, one is glaucoma, and one is cataracts. Let's see how you do. So again, the picture in the upper left is normal vision. What about the picture to the right of it? Blurry. Did you say cataracts? You're correct. Now going to the bottom left, the center where the eye wants to look is gone. The center would be the part that your fovea, that your macula would want to be involved in, so that would be macular degeneration. And on the right, you see the person has lost a lot of the peripheral part of the vision. That would be glaucoma. How did you do? So the leading cause of blindness is on the slide. Which one do you believe it is? If you think it's glaucoma, no, it would be cataracts. And although we think of cataracts with aged people or aged animals for that matter, cataracts actually occur in young individuals too, and in poor countries, the developing countries, where surgery is not affordable, is a major cause of blindness. I'd love to donate some of my spare change to some of these organizations because literally money gives sight, and it's a wonderful thing to do if you can afford to do so. Next, let's consider a family of senses, sometimes called skin senses, somatic senses, or body senses. There are three of them. Do you know what they are? If you're thinking touch, temperature, and pain, you would be correct. We'll consider touch later. Right now, let's focus on pain and temperature. Do older people feel more or less pain? Actually, biologically, they feel less, which is usually but not always good. Pain does tell you that you're injured or have maybe an infection going, but they often have conditions that are chronic and are painful. Anywhere between half to 3/4 of people in late adulthood have chronic pain issues. Sometimes opiates will have to be used. Opiates, as you know, have quite a few serious drawbacks. I know you know addiction, but they also cause constipation, dry mouth, and drowsiness. This can all negatively impact the quality of the senior's life. Moving away from the pain issue, considering temperature. Temperature is both related to the skin and the functioning of your hypothalamus. Many elderly feel cold more severely. This is in part due to decreased metabolism, maybe a side effect of medications, maybe related to anemia. Because the senior is less likely to read environmental stimuli properly, they do risk overheating. Moving on, let's consider the vestibular sense, our fancy term for sense of balance. The key structures are in the inner ear, and this structure does function far less efficiently with advanced age. But what brain structure did we say also plays an essential role in balance? If you're thinking hypothalamus, no. How about cerebellum? I debated whether or not to include this last point, but decided I would. My father has been in terms of pain and not being able to feel things, that includes bladder infections. Usually when a young person gets a bladder infection, they're painful, they know it. Seniors often are oblivious and have no pain. My father's been hospitalized 3 times, almost septic once. Most of my friends' parents have been hospitalized for bladder infections. So you really have to do as much as you can to harp on them to drink, to, maybe I even resort to putting cups out so he can move cups from one side of the kitchen to the other as a mnemonic system. So it's a really big problem, and it can actually result in death. Other problems are overheating. When Europe in 2019 had that hot stretch, over 30,000 people died, and they were mostly seniors. Their bodies were unable to respond to the overheating conditions. They're also more likely to have underheating or hypothermia due to everything from metabolism to less fat to anemia. So all these are significant issues for individuals in late adulthood. You might remember from intro psych that the cerebellum would be the 2 balls at the base of the brain. Lastly, let's consider the chemical senses. These would be your olfactory and gustatory senses. In other words, smell and taste. Highly related. Basically, you're smelling bits of chemicals in the air or tasting bits of chemicals upon your tongue. When people get to the 85 and older age, half have no ability to smell or taste whatsoever. The next slide will consider implications. Before you go to the next slide, I'd ask you to take a look at all these senses that we've discussed, and we have not discussed all, but take a look at the senses we've discussed and see how their change in functioning might have day-to-day implications in the person's ability to do the daily activities of living, and indeed their overall quality of life. Let's start with vision. Poor vision can mean the person will have trouble driving, either leading to the loss of activities and independence, or sometimes a person driving that has no right to be on the road. Lack of driving can make it difficult to see friends, to get together with and do activities. It can also pose significant problems in daily living, such as perhaps reading one's medication. Reading will become difficult. Maybe special eyewear would be needed, or large edition books, or audiobooks. Many hobbies require very good vision. Next, let's consider the chemical senses. Since trouble with smell and taste, the person might over salt, particularly problematic with people who have high blood pressure. Or the person doesn't enjoy eating, so won't buy high quality food or won't bother to pay for eating out with one's friends because you really can't taste it. If you can't smell, think of the implications you can't smell. You can't smell if a stove is left on. You might not be aware that you yourself smell, or that you're using too much cologne or too much perfume. Let's consider somatic issues. Well, if there's issues with touch, could be troubles with the ADLs. Pain, the person's inability to recognize it may lead to missing warning signs of an infection or an injury. Temperature, they may keep their home entirely too hot for others. I have a friend that now that's a visiting nurse, and she's fully garbed in plastic, and she's going to homes that are 90 degrees and having quite a bit of difficulty. With the risk of overheating is particularly problematic in homes that do not have air conditioning. Most American homes do, but air conditioners in Europe are fairly uncommon, most typically found at hotels in which foreigners visit. In 2019, the European heat wave killed 30,000 plus seniors. Issues with the vestibular sense? Well, less balance means maybe less willing to walk, less willingness to go outside in general, withdrawing, trouble with balance leading to falls. We know that exercise is important at any age and that probably most of us don't get enough. But if it's important for children or adolescents or young adults or middle-aged adults, it's even more important to people in late adulthood. It is the single leading contributor to longevity. Benefits? So many. Physically, balance, energy, bone health, heart health, and muscle mass. You might not be so up on muscle mass until you read your textbook and learned about sarcopenia. This would be the loss of muscle mass as a part of aging. Some experts say it begins in our third decade, in our 30s, at 3 to 5% a year. So from 30 to 70, a conservative estimate would be a 12% loss. If you're a lighter exerciser, less physically active in life, you could lose 5%, which could be a 20% loss of muscle mass. This makes seniors less energy, poor balance, just prone to so many issues. Of course, exercise not only has physical benefits, it has distinct cognitive benefits, thinking, memory, and even mood. Yet, many seniors are not active at all, maybe going from living room table to couch to living room table to bathroom to couch, and that might be their entire exercise, a few back and forth the entire day. I've seen this in one of my own friends. It did lead to a fall and didn't get up accident. Ironically, I called to check on her and left her a message suggesting that she get an emergency medical alert device, and she was lying on the floor at that point, unable to get up, and spent 2 days there. One moral to that story might be, if you know any seniors in your life, make sure they have the device or have somebody calling them daily. She now has the device, and after that I started calling my aunt every day. Lack of physical exercise, we know, leads to cognitive loss, falls, mobility loss, and the loss of independence. So the risks are huge for them not being physically active. Let's now consider sexual activity in seniors. I thought it'd be a nice transition to go from the exercise slide into the sexual activity slide. So if you were asked to summarize this particular chart for 65 to 74-year-olds, and then 75 to 85, what might you say? What would jump out at me is that people in the first half of late adulthood, almost 3/4 of them are having sex at least occasionally, so they are sexually active. That 3/4 number, okay, I did a little rounding up, but that 3/4 number I think would surprise most people. If you consider people in the second half of late adulthood, Well, it now changes to about 50%. Again, we're doing a little rounding up. Again, I think that would surprise most people. So maybe we're fighting a stereotype here. I hope so. In the middle adulthood chapter, we began our discussion of osteoporosis. Now we will continue it. We know that there's a strong need to strengthen bones when young, and also to avoid risk factors. You did a quiz earlier on risk factor assessment. Osteoporosis is a significant risk for both hip and spine fractures. 1 in 3 elderly people who have a hip fracture will die within that subsequent year. Remember, it requires surgery, anesthesia, the risk of infections, the risk of blood clots, the risk of being in a hospital. In the best of circumstances, it's a major disruption of life. A rehab facility would be needed. Many times they cannot return to their own home. Let's now consider arthritis. Arthritis has 2 varieties. First, we'll discuss osteoarthritis. This is where the cartilage in your joints becomes worn, often related to wear and tear. This is a very limited form. It's not throughout the body. For example, a person might have 2 bad knees or even 1 bad knee, and that's it. Rheumatoid arthritis is a much more devastating condition. It's an inflammatory response. The immune system is actually attacking the body, and thus it involves the whole body. Let's now focus on decline in heart, in other words, cardiac, and respiratory, in other words, pulmonary systems. The heart is going to beat less effectively, so there'll be less blood flow. That's going to have significant effects on energy level, amongst other things. The lung capacity is now decreased by half. Again, less energy. There's also a significant decline in the immune system, so infections cannot be fought, such as the flu or COVID-19. 3/4 of flu deaths are those people in late adulthood. As we're seeing now in COVID, the majority of people that are dying are either seniors or people that are compromised that are younger. But despite this need, 1/3 of the elderly don't get a flu shot. We should also say the immune system not only fights bacteria and viruses, another major job is to cruise around the body looking for cells that are becoming abnormal, that are precancerous, or even cancerous, knocking them out before they knock us out. This is one reason why elderly have an increased rate of most cancers. Unfortunately, the immune system is underactive in some areas and overactive in others, so autoimmune conditions like arthritis is when the body is overactive and now targeting its own tissue instead of the foreign invader or the homegrown cancer terrorist. Let's consider diabetes. What percentage of seniors? At least 25% are fully diabetic. The issue? Too little insulin being produced by, what gland would that be? Hopefully you said the pancreas. This high glucose damages much of the body. It can damage the heart. It can damage the eyes, leading to diabetic retinopathy, a type of blindness that we didn't discuss. Kidney damage, to the extent that dialysis might be required. Nerve damage, causing extreme nerve pain. And brain issues, for example, increased risk of stroke. Obesity is a huge risk, and often diabetes can be reversed in the early stages, sometimes just by weight loss and diet accommodations. Take a look at these 10 signs of diabetes and consider how many you would actually recognize. Many people would recognize increased thirst/urination and slow wound healing. Perhaps the tingling in the hands and feet. We've seen probably commercials on the neuropathy. But other features, headaches, blurry vision, increased appetite, probably less so. Some of these are caused by increased blood sugar, such as the increased thirst and urination and excessive fatigue. Others are caused by nerve damage, such as the tingling in the hands and feet. Some are caused by poor circulation. So a variety of things, and some are caused by fluctuation of up and down. So interesting that it can have opposite effects can cause these different symptoms. But again, be aware that you might, if you see them in perhaps an older family member or a parent in particular, be thinking of potential signs of diabetes. I want to add the concept of delirium to the slide. Delirium is a temporary state. The person is confused, maybe aggressive, rambling, distressed. It's seen in seniors, for example, if they go into a hospital, you can see in that, or maybe the first day or first few days in a nursing home, you can see that. You can see it also in younger people that have severe illness burden, like burn victims, you often see that. So delirium might develop into a dementia, but more often than not, delirium can be abated. We also noted in the bottom there that some conditions mimic NCDs. Delirium is one of them, but you can see that there are other conditions that can also mimic severe NCDs as well. Before you listen to the narration, stop for a moment, if you will, and consider the term Alzheimer's and dementia. Is there a difference? Do you know the difference if there is one? Consider that for a moment, and then you can click. Dementia is an older term, but is still used. Neurocognitive disorders, or NCDs, has replaced the term dementia, but both are used again. Alzheimer is one specific cause of dementia. In other words, one specific cause of NCDs, though I will admit absolutely is the most common cause of dementia / NCDs. Let's focus on Alzheimer's now, the most common cause of dementia. Half the people that are 85 or older, in other words, the oldest old, have Alzheimer's specifically. Is it treatable? Absolutely. There was a new medication approved less than 6 months ago. In general, the medications, if they're given early, can give the person 3 more years of high quality life. And 3 years is a lot. 3 years can be a lifetime. What neurons are dying? Do you remember from intro psych? And what's the memory structure of the brain, the memory maker? Perhaps you remember discussing in intro acetylcholine. Those are the neurons that are dying. And the brain structure, I gave my students the mnemonic of hippocampus, the lost hippo on the college campus. So the hippocampus is taking a terrible beating. Is it a leading cause of American death? Yes, it's in the top 10. Other dementias, Alzheimer's is not the only one. Parkinson's commonly causes dementia. Lewy body dementia, you probably have not heard of that one. Lewy body dementia is associated with the famous person, it would be Robin Williams had Lewy body. You might have not heard of also frontotemporal lobar dementia. That's what Bruce Willis has. So there are other dementias. There's also HIV-caused dementia. You won't be responsible for those other dementias. You should know that Parkinson's is another common dementia, and that in the future it might be preventable because apparently it's apparently caused by environmental toxins. So if we can avoid and minimize, perhaps Parkinson's is the most likely one to be eliminated. You probably associate Parkinson's with Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali. You probably don't think about Parkinson's being a neurocognitive disorder, a dementia, but the majority of people with Parkinson's will go on to have dementia. That being said, I'm not going to ask you information on the other dementia on your test. I actually took out a whole slide, so I'm sure you're happy about that. From childhood on, but more so in adolescence and older, depression is common, so common that it's called the common cold of mental illness. But let's consider depression in later life. Depression can be either caused by just malfunctioning of the brain's machinery, if you want to call it that. That's endogenous. Other times there can be a trigger event. We can call that type exogenous or reactive. Let's now consider some of the factors that are associated with later adulthood. Loss of job identity. If your job was part of who you are and you no longer have it, you've lost a bit of you. Retirement is better when it's voluntary. That's when by force, by either policies of the government, the business, or maybe ill health or mental decline. Loss of important roles that could be certainly the job role, but it could be other things, such as for a woman if she's been the caretaker, for that matter if it's been a man who's been the caretaker of an elderly parent and the parent dies, and so on. So loss of significant roles. Chronic diseases, much more common in late adulthood. Chronic pain, also much more common in late adulthood. Physical decline, also more common in late adulthood. Perceived bad health, so not actual bad health, but if the person perceives themselves as being unhealthy, that's also bad. Lack of control. Think of some of the common areas where they lose control. My father recently had to stop driving, so loss of driving. They might have had to sign away their financial ability to care for themselves. Maybe they've been scammed by one of those grandpa or grandma senior scams, or many senior scams. So lack of control in their life. Maybe they've been told that they can no longer live in their home. Social isolation. Think of some of the causes of social isolation. There's quite a few. Loss of hearing. You can't communicate with your friends easily. Moving. Maybe your friends have moved to Florida, or you've moved to Florida, what have you. The death of friends. Loss of partner or friends due to dementia, and so on. So social losses, social isolation. Let's look at possible protective factors that can lower your risk of Alzheimer's. Now, that being said, you can have every single one of these and develop Alzheimer's, have none of them and still get it. But all in all, a protection is a protection. Taking anti-inflammatories, this would include aspirin and naproxen, Aleve, and the like. Apparently not the Tylenol-like drugs, though. Avoiding obesity. Obese people have a 20% increased risk. Mental stimulation. Take a moment and think what mental stimulation might include. Most people think of puzzles, Sudoku, or otherwise. True. It could be playing cards with friends. It could be playing Scrabble with friends. It could be various shared online games with friends. You might be surprised on the next slide, a couple things that you might not think mental stimulation. Talking politics with friends, but my advice is only if they share similar viewpoints. If not, you're likely to lose the friend, especially in today's climate. But mental stimulation. Education, which could be as obviously part of mental stimulation. So once you are retirement age, you can take many college courses for free. I have 2 senior auditors right now. They're very welcome. Vitamins. Not smoking and or avoiding heavy drinking anyway. Exercise, note the 3 exclamation points. Avoid nighttime labeled products. And the next slide is some of the new cutting edge things I thought I would share with you. Oh, by the way, the picture is a normal brain on the right. See all the activity, see the size, see the small holes, ventricles. The brain on the left from the same size, should have been the same size brain. See far less activity, the huge ventricles, the diminished size, all signs of the brain is being ravaged by Alzheimer's. I read an article last year looking at factors associated with prevention of Alzheimer's, decreasing your risk, and one was actually housework. So look at women are much more inclined to be doing a lot of the housework than men in heterosexual couples, and assuming that they're both healthy, and that women often are given a certain degree of protection that men aren't afforded because doing housework requires planning and organizing and et cetera. It's actually good cognitively as well as physically. Viagra might be working as its role in increasing circulation, but that would be only really useful for cis males. Anti-herpes medication, apparently the herpes virus being in the brain is very ubiquitous in people with Alzheimer's. And mushrooms, there's some interesting research coming from Asia saying that even a little bit of ingestion of mushrooms can have a significant protective factor. The studies looked at either fresh or canned, either one, having as little as 2 or 3 cans of those little small cans a week, apparently made a significant decrease in minor and major mild neurocognitive disorders, in other words, various forms of dementia, and especially Alzheimer's.